the Russians had started to mobilize around Ukraine under the guise of a military exercise. Now, obviously, the kind of first invasion happened in 2017 in the eastern part of Ukraine, but there was this kind of rumor that, oh, Russia might invade, but they might be just doing like, intimidation exercises on the border. I had a really bad feeling about it. And it started to kind of affect me in my work. Like I was living in Amsterdam at the time. I was a director at KPMG in their consulting practice. I just became like really distracted. And then on February 24th, 2022, when the full-scale invasion happened, I submitted my resignation.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then 10 days later, I was on a plane to Poland because you can't fly into Ukraine at that point. And then from there went, pretty much from Warsaw to the border. And by that time, the first wave of Ukrainians that were being displaced from the east were arriving at the Polish border. So I saw some of the first trains of those folks that were coming right out of the invasion, fleeing to safety in Poland. And then from there, was really trying to figure the startup guy in me, trying to, and also the consultant in me, trying to understand the journey and where are the kind of pain points and stuff like that. That's what eventually led to the formation of Pathfinders for Ukraine when Canada announced its emergency visa program for war-displaced Ukrainians, which happened about 3 weeks later.
Yeah, so you helped 700 Ukrainians find their way to Canada, and you were in the Warsaw station.
Yeah, we got about 700 onto planes. So not only did we partner with organizations that were flying aid in, we got people on the way out. We also got a lot of private sponsorships to get people onto planes. And I think really impactfully, being headquartered out of Warsaw Central Station, it was like the nexus of where all the war-displaced Ukrainians were coming from when they left Ukraine and got into Poland. So we set up a Canada desk, and we helped like 11,000 people because we had hundreds of people coming every day. And there were 1.2 million Ukrainians applied for that visa to come to Canada. It was the most popular program of any country. And about 300,000 actually arrived. There was no kind of organization that was on the ground there helping people, make that next step. And we were next to the Brits. We were at other shelters where there was 12 other countries. So, Canada was a really kind of interesting option, just given the history of Ukraine and Canada.
Yeah. Take me back to the day of what you were seeing and what you were feeling in that moment.
When I was in the hotels, there were all these other people, combinations of like mercenaries, so people who were there to join the Foreign Legion, smugglers. There were people who were smuggling in like helmets, vests, weapons into Ukraine to help out the Ukrainian army. There were journalists, there were humanitarians, spies and intelligence people around.
And then there was Randall.
Yeah, and then there was me and we were, I got to meet all these interesting people. So that was like a really interesting time because it wasn't clear what were the kind of options for, A, helping, and then B, there were no clear options for what to do with all these Ukrainians. And at one point, Poland, I think, took on 800,000 or more.
Because they were the closest. Like
they were
makes sense,
exactly
geographically.
Exactly. And, the first people that could leave were primarily like the elderly and women and their children. Like they looked like my mom, my aunts, my grandparents. And like, I had to pause because it was so difficult to see because I just imagined them in those circumstances. The Polish people were incredibly generous. There were women leaving carriages, like empty carriages, the train stations. It was incredibly chaotic in the beginning, and then when the Canadian government came out with the emergency visa program, again we saw that there was a lot of interest, not a lot of guidance for these folks, and not all of them speak English, and so we essentially were able to eventually set up in Warsaw Central Station. So there are these kind of islands within the station that were once coffee shops turned into these like essentially these information desks. So some desks were showing them where to get to shelters within Warsaw. Others were the different country desks. Other were medical aid. They set up in one of the waiting rooms like this children's kind of daycare center. Like it turned into this kind of makeshift like aid center, and it was this hub of humanitarian aid from people from everywhere. What was really kind of critical and I think gratifying was we had these people I call them hop the desk Ukrainians. So these would be Ukrainians that we helped get their kind of emergency visa and all that. And then the next day they would show up, put on a vest, and then come around and volunteer with us.
Amazing.
And, usually they're the ones who spoke fluent English and Ukrainian or Russian, and they were able to help their fellow people. And that to me was like, they were the most critical part of our organization. And B, like, it was just so like encouraging to see them wanting to help their own people amidst their own kind of chaos and trauma and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
And you facilitated some of that.
Yeah, we trained them on like what is the kind of process and programs and stuff like that. We built kind of tools and information. We even built, the tech guy in me built an app, of course, which helped them decide which city to go to. So we translated all the jobs codes, 650 of them or so, into Ukrainian for the first time. Took the jobs data at the city level to figure out which city they should go to, because picking a job is an important factor in deciding where you're going to live. Because when we asked them, where do you want to go? They all said Toronto. And I'm like, you got family or a job there? And they're like, no, it's the only city I know. We're like, well, it's not necessarily the best option for you. So yeah, we built stuff that really helped people hopefully make informed decisions. And again, what was really gratifying is to see some of these people when I finally came back to Canada, resettling here and really thriving, working great jobs, sending kids to school where some of them tell me that their English and French is better than their Ukrainian now. Like, they're really integrating. And so our kind of current fight is to help give them a pathway to permanent residence, because some of these folks have been displaced maybe 6 or 7 times since that first invasion. They could have easily gone to Germany or UK or Netherlands. The supports were much more generous there. They made a conscious decision to start a new life in Canada, and we really wanted to give them that option to live in peace and prosperity here.
Did you run into any struggles in the North Korean or Ukrainian ventures?
Is a challenge because there's no playbook for any of this stuff. So you got to kind of figure out as you go along. But again, being a startup founder, being consulting, you kind of like are trained to deal in ambiguity. And I think what was most helpful was, I try to really, when I was in healthcare, I tried to walk the patient journey, understand every touch point. That's what I did with the Ukrainian stuff. So I went across to Ukraine. I walked across the border. I slept on the shelter floors. I went to the train stations. I wanted to really understand what was the journey, where were the struggles, where's the kind of question marks where they don't know where to go or what to do. That's where we essentially had set up, and that's why we were able to be so accessible to those war displaced Ukrainians.
How would you define something or somebody
Yeah.
as being bold?
Being bold is, to me, about leading with your heart rather than with your head. A lot of times we are presented with these opportunities and we try to rationalize them. We try to put them into cost benefit, probabilistically, what's the outcome, blah, blah, blah. And it often, because we get more kind of, I guess, risk averse as we get older, you often shut yourself down from these opportunities. I didn't do it because it made sense or I saw a real benefit or it was certainly not the most profitable option. And it wasn't necessarily it was definitely not the safest option either. But my heart told me that it was something that was important, that it was in honor of my grandparents or my parents. And so that's what I followed. So you have to kind of let your heart override your head in those circumstances. And I think that's what being bold generally is.